This is Module 6, Lesson 11. In this lesson, we'll be comparing and ordering mixed numbers in various forms. I'm going to write some numbers here in different forms. So the first one is 1300ths, which is in unit form. Then 1700ths in decimal form. 2/10ths in decimal form, 3/10ths in unit form, 3400ths in fraction form, and 4/10ths in fraction form. Now, if we want to compare these, the easiest thing to do is to pick one of the three forms and turn all of the other fractions or mixed numbers that are being shown into the same form. So let's, for this one, decide to choose fraction form. So 1300ths in fraction form would look like this. 1700ths in fraction form. 2/10ths in fraction form. 3/10ths in fraction form. 3400ths in fraction form, and 4/10ths in fraction form. The last two obviously are already in the fraction forms. What we see we have here is some denominators of 100 and some denominators of 10. So we're simply going to turn the ones that are in tenths into equivalent hundredths by multiplying the numerators and the denominators by 10. So this would be 2000ths, 3000ths, and 4000ths. So now it's very easy to compare these because the units are all the same. So let's say we wanted to plot these on a number line. So we need to be able to show our lowest number. So 1300ths is here, so let's start with the equivalent of 1000ths would be 1/10. And then let's do 2/10ths and 3/10ths, and finally 4/10ths. And then we divide each into hundredths. And now we can plot these. So first of all, I'm going to plot them in their new unit form in hundredths. So 1300ths, we know that 1/10th is 1000ths, so 11, 12, 1300ths would be here. And then 1700ths would be 14, 15, 16, 1700ths. We have 2/10ths already plotted, which we said was the same as 2000ths. And we have 3/10ths, which we said was the same as 3000ths. And then if this is 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, this would be 3400ths. And we have 4/10ths, which we said was the same as 4000ths. Then we can also go back in and write in what their original units were. So 13/10ths we originally had in unit form. And 1700ths was in decimal form. 2/10ths was in decimal form. 3/10ths was in unit form. And 3400ths and 4/10ths were already in fraction form. So we've plotted our original numbers on the number line by converting them into the same units, and then we can mark them with their original units. Let's look at another one. Let's look at these numbers. 18 tenths, 1 and 8 hundredths, 18 hundredths, 1 and 81 hundredths, 190 hundredths, and 1 and 82 hundredths. Okay, so here we have some mixed numbers. And again, the strategy is the same. We want to put these in units that we can compare to each other. So first of all, let's pull out any whole numbers. So 18 tenths, we know is equivalent to 1 and 8 tenths. Since 10 tenths is 1, if I take 10 tenths out, I'd have 8 tenths left over. If I write this as a fraction, this is 1 and 8 hundredths. 18 hundredths is already in the fractional form. 1 and 81 hundredths already in fractional form. 190 hundredths would be 1 and 90 hundredths. Again, 100 hundredths is 1, leaving 90 hundredths, and this would be 1 and 82 hundredths. Now we're going to order these from greatest to least. So we're going to look for the largest one. So we start again with the largest place value. So the largest place value are ones. We can see right away that this is going to be our least one. We can put this one way down here at the end because it has no whole number part of it. So we're done with that one. The rest of them all have a whole number 1, so that doesn't help us. So now we're going to look for the next highest fractional part. We see that 4 of these have hundreds. This one has a 10, so let's make this one 100 also. So we have 80 hundredths, 8 hundredths, 81 hundredths, 90 hundredths, and 82 hundredths. So 1 and 90 hundredths would have to be the largest. And the original number was 190 hundredths. So we've done that one. Then the next one we're going to find is 82 hundredths as being the next highest one. And its original form was a decimal. So that would come next. And if we're going to use our greater than, less than symbols, we can start adding those in. The next one would be 81 hundredths. So we've used that one, and it's in original form. Then we have 80 hundredths, which was originally which was originally 1 and 8 tenths. So we've used that one. And then we have 1 and 8 hundredths. I'm sorry, that was our new unit. Our original unit was 1 and 8 hundredths in decimal form. And then finally, our least one was 18 hundredths. So we've ordered these from least to greatest. But again, the strategy is to make all the units the same so that we can compare them. Let's try one more. This time we're going to look at something using this in terms of a word problem. So during a triple jump contest, Hae Young jumped 8 and 76 hundredths of a meter. Marlene, or Marianne, jumped 8 and 7 tenths of a meter. Beth jumped 880 hundredths of a meter. And Lily jumped 8 and 7 hundredths of a meter. And the question is, in what place did each student rank? So the longest jump is going to be the person who came in first. So again, we have two numbers in decimal form and two numbers in fractional form. So for this one, let's turn them all into decimals. So we already have a decimal here. We can rewrite this one as a decimal. Now here we have to first pull out the whole number, 8. 8 hundredths would be 8, which would leave us with 80 hundredths. And finally, we have 8 and 7 hundredths. All right, so comparing the ones place, they're all the same. So that doesn't help us decide which is greater. Then we're going to move to the tens place. We've got 2 7/10ths, an 8/10, and a 0. So we know that Beth jumped the furthest. Then the next two are 7/10ths, but Marianne just jumped only 7/10ths, whereas Haewang jumped 76 hundredths. So this 6 hundredths means he jumped further than Marianne, so he has to be in second place. Marianne is in third place, and Lily finished fourth. So we can use what we've learned here to also help us solve word problems. So let's try some problems in a problem set. So for number 1, we're going to plot the following points on the number line. So the number line's been drawn for us. And again, you need to use the strategy of turning all of the numbers into the same units. So you could either choose decimals, or you could choose fractions, or even if you wanted to turn all of them, you could turn them all into unit form. So pause the video, decide how you want to convert all these numbers, and then place them on the number line in their original form. You can write the common form first, but then go back and make sure that you mark them in their original form. So pause the video and give this a try. Okay, I'm going to decide to turn them all into decimal form. So the first number is in decimal form already. 1/10 in decimal form. The third number is in decimal form already. The fourth number in decimal form would be written this way. The fifth number is already in decimal form, and I'm going to write the last one in decimal form. So now I'm going to plot these on my number line. So first of all, I have 2/10, and then I have 1/10, and then I have 33/10, and I have 12/10, and 21/10, and 32/10. And now I'm going to go back and match them up with their original form. This original form was written as a fraction. This was also written as a fraction. This was a decimal. This was a decimal. This was a fraction. And this was a decimal. So those are the plots of my original numbers. Moving on, you're going to do the same thing for B. So pause the video and try B. Okay, this time I'm going to rewrite them all in fraction form. So this is 3 and 62 hundredths, 3 and 7/10, 3 and 85 hundredths, 38 tenths, but I'm going to turn this right now into a mixed number. And the same with 364 hundredths. I'm going to turn this into a mixed number. And now I'm going to turn all of the fractions in tenths into hundreds. Okay, so now I have everything in terms of hundreds. And if I look on the number line here, I have 3 and 6 tenths, 3 and 7 tenths, 3 and 8 tenths, 3 and 9 tenths. So 3 and 62 hundredths would be 3 and 6 tenths plus 2 hundredths. So I'm going to write the original form of the number. If you still need to write the converted form so you don't lose your place, that's fine. But if you can skip that step, that's fine. Here, 3 and 7 tenths is already marked on our number line. Then 3 and 85 hundredths, here's 3 and 80 hundredths. So this would be 3 and 85 hundredths. Then 38 tenths, we said, is the same as 3 and 8 tenths. So that would be right here. So that would be 38 tenths. And finally, we said that 364 hundredths is the same as 3 and 64 hundredths. So here's 60 hundredths and 64 hundredths. So this would be 364 hundredths. Right, I'm going to do the same thing for C. So pause the video and give C a try. Okay, since my number line is marked in decimals, I'm going to decide to rewrite these as decimals. So this is 6 and 3 tenths, 6 and 31 hundredths. I'm going to do this in my head now. I know 628 hundredths would be 6 and 28 hundredths. 62 hundredths would be 6 and 2 tenths. And then we have 6 and 48 hundredths and 6 and 40 hundredths. And again, I'm going to make this connection in my head from the original form to the one I've now converted, and I'm going to write the original form on the number line. So 6 and 3 tenths is right here, and I'm going to write it in its original fraction form. The next is 6 and 31 hundredths, so that would be 30 hundredths plus one more hundredth, and I'm going to write it in its original decimal form. Then 628 hundredths would be 6 and 28 hundredths, and I'm writing it in its original form. Then 62 tenths would be the same as 6 and 2 tenths. Then 6 and 48 hundredths, here's 40 hundredths, so 48 would be right here. Actually, I think that's a 3. So I'm going to do, okay, 6 and 43 hundredths, sorry about that. And the last one is 6 and 40 hundredths, which is the same as 6 and 4 tenths. So now I've plotted all my numbers on my number line. Okay, moving on. Now for this one, we're going to be putting the numbers in order, and it tells us to do it from least to greatest, and it tells us to use decimal form, and then we have to use the greater than symbol. So pause the video and try A. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite all these numbers in decimal form, since that's what I need to end up with. So 27 tenths is 2 and 7 tenths. Then I have 2 and 7 hundredths. Then I have 27 hundredths. Then I have 2 and 71 hundredths. And then this would be a mixed number of 2 and 27 hundredths, and finally 2 and 72 hundredths. So looking at these, I can see right away that my least one is going to be this one because it doesn't have a whole number part. So I'm going to put that number way here at the end because I know it's going to be the least. Now the next, I need to compare, all the whole numbers are 2, so I need to compare the place values in the decimal part. So I have a 7 and a 0 and a 7 and a 2 and a 7. So I've got 3 sevens. So I have 7 and no hundreds, 7 and 100, 7 and 2 hundredths. So 7 and 2 hundredths, 7 tenths and 2 hundredths is going to be my largest. So my greatest number is going to be 2 and 72 hundredths. And that's going to be my greatest one. The next one was going to be 2 and 71 hundredths. And the next one is going to be 2 and 7 tenths, no hundredths. Then I have a 0 and a 2 in the tenths place, so the 2 is going to come next. And 7 hundredths, and finally 27. Now I'm going to go back and write these in their original form. So 2 and 72 hundredths was in decimal form to start with. 2 and 71 hundredths was written in fraction form. Then 2 and 7 tenths was written as an improper fraction. Then 2 and 27 hundredths was written also as an improper fraction. Then 2 and 7 hundredths was written in decimal form. And finally 27 hundredths was written as a decimal. Okay, so I ordered these based on their turning them into common units, and then I also showed them in their original units. Okay, for B, just change them into decimal form and put them in order. You don't need to list them in their original form. So go ahead and try B. So we have 12 and 3 tenths, 13 and 2 tenths, 1 and 34 tenths, 13 and 2 tenths, and 12 and 20 hundredths. Okay, so we're going to start with the whole number parts. We have 12, a 13, a 1, a 13, and a 12. So the 1 is, we know right away, is going to be our least number. Then we have two numbers that start with 13, 13 and 2 tenths, and 13 and 2 hundredths. We know tenths are greater than hundredths, so that one's got to come first. And then 13 and 2 hundredths. Now we've got two numbers with 12 as the whole number. We have 12 and 3 tenths, and 12 and 2 tenths. So the 12 and 3 tenths needs to come first, and then 12 and 2 tenths, 20 hundredths, and finally our smallest number, our least number of 1 and 34 hundredths. Okay, try the same thing with C. Okay, for writing them in decimal form, we have 7 and 34 hundredths, 7 and 4 tenths, 7 and 3 tenths, 7 and 50 hundredths, 75, and 7 and 2 tenths. So again, looking at the whole number parts, we have a 7 and a 7 and a 7 and a 7 and a 75 and a 7. So obviously that 75 is going to come first. the rest of them all have 7s in the 1 place. So now we're going to look at the 10s place. We have a 3 and a 4 and a 3 and a 5 and a 2. So 5/10 is going to come next. And then we have a 4/10. Then we have 2 numbers with 3s in the 10th place. This one has 400ths. This one has no hundredths. So this one's going to come next. And then 7 and 3/10. And finally 7 and 2/10. All right, now we're going to use this to help us solve some word problems. In the long jump event, Rhonda jumped 1 6400 meters. Mary jumped 1 6/10 of a meter. Carrie jumped 9400ths of a meter. And Michelle jumped 1 600 meters. Who jumped the furthest? So pause the video and figure this one out. Okay, once again, the strategy is to turn them all into like units. So let's turn these all into fractions. So let's do 1 6400 for Rhonda. Mary did 1 6/10. Carrie did 9400. And Michelle jumped 1 600. So who jumped the furthest? Well, right away we see that Carrie didn't even jump 1 full meter. She jumped 9400, so she's out. Then everyone else jumped at least a meter. We have 2 that are represented in hundreds and 1 that's represented in tens. So let's multiply the numerator denominator by 10 and make this 1 60/100 so we can compare. So we have 6400ths, 60/100ths, and 600ths. So we see that Rhonda jumped the farthest. Okay, for number 4, in December, 2 3/10 feet of snow fell. In January, 2 1400 feet of snow fell. In February, 2 1900 feet of snow fell. And in March, 1 1/10 feet of snow fell. During which month did it snow the most? And during which month did it snow the least? So pause the video and solve this one. Okay, let's write for December. It was 2 3/10. For January, 2 1400. For February, 2 1900. And for March, it's 1 1/10. So before I even change units, I can see right away that March is going to be the least because it has 1 as a whole number compared to the other ones that have 2s. So right away I know that it snowed the least in March. So now in these other months, it snowed at least 2 feet. So this was 3/10. This is 1400. This is 1900. And so 3/10 would be 30/100. So I have 30/100, 1400, 1900. So 30/100 is the greatest. So it snowed the most. In December. And that concludes lesson 11.